The super cheerful firework girl Yoimiya is getting a rerun in Genshin Impact, and to be honest, she is actually quite decent nowadays. While she is definitely not the top of the Genshin Impact meta or meta defining, her pull value has went up a lot ever since her initial debut. In today's Should You Pull for Yoimiya video, we're gonna be talking about the good stuff as well as the bad stuff, and if you should be pulling for her. If you're here during Yoimiya's initial debut, you might have remembered a lot of the early controversy surrounding Yoimiya, how she was a pretty terrible character, even with one of the highest upvoted Reddit posts of all time on the Genshin Impact subreddit, with over 18k upvote titled Why Yoimiya Needed Fixing, even with content creator or fans in CN writing letter addressing to MiHoYo to ask them please buff Yoimiya. Initially, I was pretty harsh on Yoimiya as well, but let's talk about where she stands now, starting off with her primary playstyle as a primary pyro damage dealer. Within the Genshin Impact meta, Yoimiya is played when you require heavy single target damage, often dealing against bosses in the Abyss. Yoimiya's biggest selling point though is that she can do decent single target damage while being extremely comfortable or even easy to play. As well, she is not only ranged while most other Genshin Impact damage dealer are melee, but also her only input requirement is to spam left click. Just remember to fire off your 5th shot before you cancel off her attack strings. Comparing to the other character occupying the exact same position, Hu Tao, who is also a primary single target damage pyro dealer, Hu Tao is significantly harder to play than Yoimiya, involving a lot of dash cancel and jump cancel. So for someone who is just simply looking for a good time or a easier time of doing damage in Genshin Impact, Yoimiya could actually be a much suitable choice compared to someone like Hu Tao. And to be very honest, while it's still true that Yoimiya is no match for Hu Tao in terms of absolute string in the Genshin Impact meta, over the course of year, Yoimiya definitely got much better and much closer to Hu Tao's string than compared to her initial debut. With the release of Yunjin in Genshin Impact, Yoimiya is no longer dependent on Bennett, and therefore Yoimiya has become a true Bennettless carry, as you can simply substitute with Yunjin instead. This is much better, as previously you were forced to run Bennett on your Yoimiya team if you wanted to do competitive single target damage, but even when you runted Bennett together with Yoimiya, your damage output will still not be as high as Hu Tao, who does not require Bennett. So this was just a waste of Bennett because you were pairing Bennett together with a pyro character when you could have just not run Bennett and ran Hu Tao instead. And if you were to include Bennett in your team, then very often than not, you would be much better off running Xiangling instead of Yoimiya, which means that Yoimiya would just straight up power crap by Xiangling or Hu Tao. Either you decide to put Bennett into your team and then Yoimiya get power crap by Xiangling, or you decide not to put Bennett in your team and Yoimiya get power crap by Hu Tao. No matter what, it was a lose-lose situation. By making Yoimiya a Bennettless carry with the release of Yunjin, the comparison between Yoimiya and Hu Tao is much closer, as now both of these characters doesn't depend on Bennett and we can compare them on the same page. This also lets you release Bennett from your Yoimiya team, which then you can run on your second half of the Abyss with Xiangling, and therefore it is possible to run Yoimiya and then Bennett Xiangling all together in your Abyss setup now, which is significantly better than her initial release where you would just get power crap by one or the other. In addition to Yunjin though, Yoimiya got a second power up through the release of Yelan, who is one of the strongest characters in Genshin Impact. Compared to Xingqiu's, Yelan is a more offensive orientated Hydro sub DPS, and her A4 talent buff can definitely help boost the Yoimiya damage even further. And while it is possible to run Yelan with Hu Tao, Yelan was just not that great with Hu Tao because you lose the defensive option from Xingqiu's in addition to losing the Hydro application that Hu Tao desperately need. And so one can argue that Hu Tao is definitely a lot more tied to Xingqiu still, while Yoimiya can freely run Yelan without much problem, and therefore it overall leveled the playing field a little bit more as well. And while with the release of Yelan, double Hydro has become top of the meta and is what you should be running with your Hu Tao, unfortunately Yoimiya also drives double Hydro extremely well, and in some occasion you can argue that it is even better as Yoimiya can drive them from a range distance. Overall, all of these definitely help close the gap between Yoimiya and Hu Tao. Again, Hu Tao is still argued to be stronger than Yoimiya in terms of the absolute power and in the Genshin Impact meta. Yoimiya has definitely caught up a lot compared to Hu Tao, and if you much rather prefer the playstyle of Yoimiya being ranged or just because she is significantly easier than play than Hu Tao, Yoimiya is a very solid option at doing all of these, especially as single target. However, with that being said, I want to cover some of the bigger problem with Yoimiya, which is what are her core weaknesses, especially compared to one like Hu Tao. And to be very honest, the most straightforward one is that Hu Tao just does more single target damage as a pyro damage dealer, and therefore Hu Tao strictly outclass Yoimiya if you're looking for absolute meta. One of the biggest problem with Yoimiya gameplay is that she's strictly single target damage locked in. That means no matter what you do, you can only hit one target at a time doing single target damage. In comparison to Hu Tao, with well positioning and well gameplay, your charge attack can actually reliably hit 2 or even more enemy, and therefore dealing AoE damage in the process. It should go without saying, but the more enemy you can hit at once, the more overall damage you do, since your damage will get multiplied by the amount of enemy you're able to hit. If you hit 2 enemy doing 100 damage each, then your total damage is 200. If you hit 3 enemy doing 100 damage each, then your total damage is 300, and it's scaled linearly up multiplied by the amount of enemy you're able to hit. Since Yoimiya can only hit 1 enemy at a time, that multiplier just doesn't exist on Yoimiya, and so when you're comparing Yoimiya in a AoE environment, she'll lose by like 3 or even 4 times the amount of damage as other characters. One of the very important thing I want to call about Yoimiya that is often not discussed is that on Yoimiya, gameplay improvement practically don't exist. As Yoimiya is so easy to play, all you have to do is practically speaking spam left click most of the time. You are very likely to already be pulling out max potential on Yoimiya, which could be a good thing but also be a negative thing. That means that if your max potential Yoimiya is not meeting the DPS check that Abyss need, then you have no method of actually beating that chamber except to get more stat, which boosts up your Yoimiya attack power. In comparison, other characters like Hu Tao or even Xiangling or even Dunluke or Klee, you can always think about how can I squeeze out a little bit more damage, how can I play better. For example, on Dunluke, you can think about how I can use my elemental burst to try to group the enemy together doing really good AoE damage. How can I make sure that my elemental skill are getting that poise value in so that I can stagger the enemy to make sure that they stay in place and therefore dish out more damage in the process. That thought process, just practically speaking, doesn't exist for Yoimiya. It is impossible to quote unquote play better on Yoimiya as you just spam left click. And so when you don't cut it, you just don't cut it. And to be honest, while it is possible to run a more AoE orientated team composition on Yoimiya like Taser Team is actually not that excellent on Yoimiya either, as the overload will very often knock the enemy away, which kind of grief your grouping as positioning. But more importantly is that while Yoimiya is ranged, her range distance is actually not very high. And so when you overload the enemy and knock them away, very often you actually have to chase against them even though you're ranged. So the overload actually doesn't help you, and in fact actually actively grief you, and therefore just making Taser comp not that comfortable to play. Combine it with the fact that, well, if you really want to run a Taser comp, then Sucrose or even the latest released Hazel characters is just often better and power crapping Yoimiya in the process. Dashing around on Yoimiya actually introduced us to her second biggest problem, which is she is very reliant on finishing her entire attack string to get the 5th attack in. If you try to do the normal attack string on Yoimiya, you realize that her 5th attack take a little time to come out. Yoimiya is very reliant on not getting interrupted during your attack string so that you can get your 5th attack through, because not only has the biggest scaling, but it also lines up perfectly well with ICD. So in case you're playing a Vaporize comp, you have to get the 5th string out without ever getting interrupted. And of course, the problem is that anytime you dash or do something like that, you realize that your attack string will immediately go back to the 1st, and therefore resetting you back to 0 furthest away from the 5th attack. As we have to get the 5th attack out, we have to complete the entire string without getting interrupted, which means without getting hit by an enemy or without dashing the dodge away from an enemy attack. This is the reason why very often Yoimiya is recommended to be ran with a shielder like Zhongli, which allow you to just tank the attack instead of having to dodge, because you're so reliant on your 5th attack to do damage that you are pretty much required to bring a shielder. In comparison to our peer, once again, Hu Tao, who damage actually come out immediately or is on demand, as you can just do a charge attack as soon as you input a charge attack command. And so you're not tied to anything like getting interrupted by the enemy or getting hit by the enemy. To be very honest, you can actually argue that Hu Tao is less reliant on a shooter than Yoimiya because of that restriction. So what that really means is that the better you are at the game, which means the less reliant you are on defensive option like a shooter, better, and the better you can do Hu Tao's animation cancel, the gap will go much bigger between Yoimiya and Hu Tao. And so for a player who is chasing the absolute meta of Genshin Impact, very often Hu Tao is much more recommended than Yoimiya for all of these reasons. And of course, both Yoimiya and Hu Tao get outclassed by the free 4-star character Belovable Xiangling. To be very honest, while Yoimiya has some problem that kind of hold her back as a damage dealer, the very core problem of Yoimiya when it comes down to the Genshin Impact meta game is that she is outclassed by some other character in every single position. In terms of single target damage, you're outclassed by Hu Tao. In terms of AoE damage, you're outclassed by Xiangling. In terms of as a driver, you're outclassed by one like Sucrose or even Hazel, who is our latest release of Genshin Impact. If you are someone who is chasing the Genshin Impact meta, which is many of you who are watching this video, then it doesn't really make sense to pull for Yoimiya when you can just be pulling for a better unit, or you might even have some of these better units at your disposal already. If you're not someone who cared that much about the meta though, and you're just looking for a easy to play, a very cute character to play to do single target damage, then to be honest, it is perfectly valid to pull for a Yoimiya. I have to say, I will not say between Hu Tao or Yoimiya which one is cuter, because all the Hu Tao fans gonna attack. But unfortunately, coming back to the meta, as strictly better alternatives exist, I unfortunately have to drop Yoimiya pull value down a little bit, and I'm gonna put her at a 2.5 out of 5 pull value, same as her initial release, which means that she is below average when it comes to your overall account. But again, just be aware that you can definitely still put her, simply evaluate if she is the right waifu for you. With how strong double hydro is especially, to be very honest, I would probably much rather pull Yoimiya than some of the other characters like Geo characters, I didn't say which one, or like some of the other character that doesn't fit into double hydro, simply because, well, I'd rather play Yoimiya with double hydro than a different team like Geo. With that being said, Yoimiya is definitely a pretty decent character nowadays, especially with how cheerful she is. She's definitely an absolute waifu, so if you're gonna be pulling for Yoimiya, then I wish you the best of luck. But with that being said, as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you think about Yoimiya in the comment below, and I'll see you guys next time.